And Mr. Hardesty, the elementary of 0 miles, I mean, so basically that's saying even if you live right across the street from the elementary school, the bus is going to stop there and pick you up, and we don't require them to get on the bus, correct?
That's correct.
But we will
And we have,
stop if there are kids there.
we receive requests many times for students that live within a block or two from school. And by policy, we have to pick them up.
I do know that the bus stops literally right in front of the school at my son's elementary school, so.
Yeah, we're less than a quarter mile away, and I remember calling and saying I was going to walk, and they told me I couldn't. You know, like they wanted me on the bus. So we're like 5 minutes walking distance.
Yeah, there are parents at Mechanicsville the same way because of 32, the traffic there.
Yes.
Yeah, that's another ride. Yeah.
That they were a block away. They were picking up students.
So this chart shows you the number of students that currently reside within the non-transport zone. There are 3 high schools that have a non-transport zone, and 7 middle schools. A total of 731 students currently are not eligible for transportation due to their residing within the non-transport zone.
So that means that the other 4 high schools and North Carroll Middle don't have any walkers.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay.
That's correct. And keep in mind, those figures also include, for high school, include juniors and seniors that might be driving to school. So the actual number of walkers is, for high schools, it would be less than that number in all probability. So as budgets tighten and as we've been asked to do what we can to control costs in transportation, our job is to try to maximize efficiencies as best we can. And therefore, we have been studying the non-transport zone issue, both at middle, high, and also looking back at elementary schools. Our analysis that we completed about 2 years ago, and this would have to be updated in additional study, but if the elementary non-transport zone were re-implemented, our analysis indicates there would be over 3,000 students, and this was 2 years ago, that would no longer be eligible for transportation if the elementary policy of a non-transport zone at 1.0 miles was re-implemented.
And that's about 25% of the total elementary school population, right?
There's one school in particular that almost the entire population could potentially walk.
Okay.
It's an interesting policy that we are one of only 2 that do not require a walking, or do not require a non-transport zone for elementary.
Now that, oh, go ahead.
Which elementary school is that?
That would be Westminster Elementary.
Oh, oh yeah, there's houses.
But that
Very
wouldn't-
small attendance boundary, and
Right.
there are a lot of students that reside within a mile.
That wouldn't translate into direct savings for the number of bus routes that would be saved, right? Because we run on the 3-shift schedule.
Well, we would have to complete an analysis of that. There's certainly the potential for savings. We may have to restructure our bell schedule, or at least our tiering of buses that would equalize. If we were able to save buses, let's say at Westminster Elementary, we might be able to reorganize our tiering so that there would be a savings in buses. We would certainly save on trips for that particular school, but you're correct. We may have a first and second tier. Westminster Elementary is the 3rd tier. We may have a first and second tier that we still have to accomplish. But we would have to do some really in-depth analysis to try and make the whole process as efficient as possible.
Right. You don't have any gut feel for how many bus routes that might reduce?
I wouldn't want to speculate. I would say, in all probability, if we did this system-wide, that we would have a savings, but I'm not prepared to give you a number of buses or an amount of savings at this time. So if we looked at the opposite approach, if we were to eliminate the non-transport policy, obviously for those middle and high school students, we would have to add additional buses in all probability. In some areas, not so much. In other areas, perhaps multiple buses would have to be added. Again, if we did that, we probably would want to look at our tiering of the bus routes. Again, it may require one or two schools to alter their bell schedule so that we can make more efficient use of the buses. So if our policies were rescinded, obviously there could be additional costs for buses and drivers. You know, drivers is another issue. We can acquire buses. It's harder to acquire the driver. And train the driver and keep the driver. And we can't, unfortunately right now, we can't operate a bus without a driver. So that's a major issue. If it doesn't cost us buses, it's definitely going to cost us additional time and miles. Every time that bus makes an additional stop, we are adding time to that bus route. And when you multiply that by 180 days, by an AM and PM run, by the number of buses we have out on the street, it becomes a big problem. You know, to a parent, it's a very minor issue to stop in front of their house. But when you multiply that by the number of students we have, the number of stops, we have 9,000 AM stops and about the same number of PM stops. So that's how many stops we are making every day for students. So, you know, adding to that is going to be a cost. And on the other side, as I mentioned, if we were to expand the non-transport policy, there is an opportunity perhaps for additional savings. So that concludes our summary of the EEA transportation eligibility policy.
So, quick question. So if we did expand, I'm not saying that we will, but that would potentially disrupt the whole transportation system, the bell schedule, you know, everything. That would be a lot of work just to come up with the plan and to implement it, wouldn't it?
Well, it will require a lot of analysis and probably would impact some school schedules. But until we complete the analysis, I wouldn't want to comment one way or the other on what the impact would be.
Right, and that wouldn't be something quick either. That would...
No, this would require additional study, and obviously if we were going to change in any significant way bell schedules, then we would have to put that word out well in advance.
Of course. Ms. Savigny.
So this is clearly coming up because we had public participation last month where there were several folks and a lot of emails that we've received as board members about folks pointing out specific situations. So to your point, Ms. Rothschild, we need to be really careful that we're looking at this at a policy level and not talking about any specific exceptions at the dais. But what do we plan to, I appreciate you giving us this background so that we understand exactly what the policy says and what potential changes we could make. But are we talking about, as a board, doing anything about this, or is this just an educational?
I believe it. Dr. Lockard.
This was more for information and discussion, not for action necessarily, but
Okay.
We thought we'd provide the opportunity to update the board on the policy, some of the data surrounding it, because we hadn't done that in a while, just to kind of get a better sense of how some of this all fits together with some of the issues we wrestle with.
Ms. Rothschild.
But I do believe that the policy is up for review now. If we want to make changes, now is the time to do it. And I think we also are making a statement if we say we don't want to make any changes.
So are we saying that, I guess, at next month we would want to be reviewing the actual policy and providing comments?
I feel like that time is now.
Okay.
But it seems like we're reviewing the policy right now. So if I think that if there's changes that we feel like need to be made, we should reach consensus about them now, and then it would come back.
After public feedback also.
Right.
Yeah, I was asking because we didn't receive the official policy, right, like we typically do when we're reviewing it. But
I think it's up at the front. Or, I mean, I guess if there's interest in making changes, we could have it come back next month, but I don't know, is anyone interested in making changes?
The only thing we might add from a staff level is depending on what type of changes you might be considering. If it were the type of changes that required that analysis that
Yeah.
Mike's been referring to give you meaning, a first step might be to direct us to do that analysis and bring it all back together. Because essentially, you'd be in a position, if you were looking that direction, you'd be in a position of changing a policy without knowing what really the
Right.
impacts would be.
I mean,
And time also, there's a big time span to do the analysis. And
the only thing to me, I mean, it looks like our middle school and high school, I mean, in everything, we are transporting our students more than most other counties. I think, you know, we're a rural county, so I think that that makes sense. And the only thing that I would say, and I don't support this actually, but there's only 2 counties, us and one other, that has a no transport distance for elementary school. I mean, that to me would be the only thing to look at, but I feel like because we're such a rural county, I mean, that's not, I don't find a compelling argument to make that change. No?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I
Okay.
support you on that.
Okay, so it seems like we're all in consensus that the policy should remain as is.